Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by the versatile composer Michael Price. On this episode, we will focus on his achievements in the world of television and cinema, making important contributions to various high-profile productions. Welcome, Michael.
Good afternoon. Good to speak to you, Michael.
It's great to have you on my show. Thank you very much for joining me today. And Michael, at first I would like to talk a little bit about your musical background. Have you always considered a career in the world of movies and music?
If I described my childhood music making and my early music making, then you have to be transported from cosmopolitan London, where I now live and work, to a very small town in Yorkshire, where I grew up. And the music making community up there was predominantly arranged around brass bands, which is a competitive sport in Yorkshire. And so when I was a kid, that was really the musical expression was based on either playing in schools or playing in these local bands that would go in competitions against each other. And in fact, one of the first trips that I had down to London as a kid was to come and play at the Royal Albert Hall in a competition, because I was playing in quite a good band by then. And so realistically, I I watched TV and loved films like every other kid, but I just had no connection to the idea really that anybody wrote that music, or certainly that somebody like me from a really small town could get involved with that. And then I went to study music at university, and because I came down to the south of England to do that, gradually I think my horizons broadened, and I met two or three wonderful and very kind composers who just kind of opened the door to me that real people actually do work in film music and in TV music, and it's perhaps something that in the future that I might be able to get involved with. But really, I think my particular story, which may or may not resonate with some people who are listening with us today, is that I didn't have a family with a musical background. I didn't have friends who ran production companies, or my parents' best friend wasn't a film composer. None of that, literally. So I started absolutely from scratch. And I think in many ways, actually, I reflect on that sometimes, that the path that I ended up taking, which went through sort of being an assistant and an editor, and then perhaps finding my voice slightly later in life, I wonder whether that sort of early upbringing is part of that.
Thank you very much for elaborating on that, Michael. And of course, as an artist, musician, and also as a composer, you not only have to deal with, the writing part and the notes and the technical terms and the terminology, you also have to handle the technical aspect of
Mhm.
scoring, from, the digital mock-ups to, plugins, guitar
Mhm.
pedals, and so on. How do you handle this aspect, and also which studio setup do you find most effective and comfortable?
I consider myself in a way to be almost just like a studio native, in that I trained in pop studios and things when back in the days of tape and analog, and then have been playing around with computers and with synths and modules for as long as I can remember. So on a good day, I feel like the systems that I use and the studio that I've built here in London feels like an instrument, and feels like it's very natural. There's a lot of sort of muscle memory there, and I spend a lot of time with. I've got somebody full time who works with me called Nick, who's amazing. We spend a lot of time on the ergonomics of the systems which we use, because you're absolutely right. It is a very technical process, and I've tried over the years to make the technology that I use, whether it is computer based or it is analog, so sort of actual pieces of physical musical equipment. I've tried to make that as seamless and as uninterrupted as possible. So I do use a bunch of Mac computers. I write on a program called Logic that Apple make and also use Pro Tools to record and mix like many other people. But also I've got a range of all sorts of vintage equipment, whether that is old tape delays or old EQs and compressors. And I've got a wonderful old CS80 Yamaha synth, which is the one that Vangelis made famous in Blade Runner and
Great.
Chariots of Fire. And I've been sort of really collecting over the years to try and amalgamate the best of vintage with the best of modern technology, but always with that sense of trying to keep it as much as elegantly aligned as possible, so that I can stay in the flow and not have to do too much tech support for myself.
And Michael, if I'm not mistaken, you had your first experience working on feature film in 1997 when you started working with the late great Michael Kamen on Event Horizon.
I did. That was literally my first day at work, which is right.
Starting with a high-profile composer on a big movie. Please tell me a bit about your experience working with Michael Kamen and the variety of tasks which you faced on projects such as the aforementioned Event Horizon, X-Men, Band of Brothers.
Oh yeah, I mean we're going back to a time which I'm incredible. I sort of still surprised about myself, really. I kind of I got the job through a series of random connections, and because I was at the time I was one of the few people who knew a music scoring program called Sibelius, because it had just been hadn't been launched for very long, and so I think that was perhaps why I was thought to be useful as an assistant, which was that I'd got a copy of this on a computer and I could come and do scores and parts. But the I think working with any composer is about trying to see them as honestly as possible, and then trying to see what they don't like doing and trying to do as much of that as you can. So Michael was the most spontaneous and gregarious and musical man. He wanted every day and almost his entire life to have an element of sort of performance to it and have an element of fun, certainly. And so he was brought down practically by the sort of by the spreadsheets of film scoring. He found the sort of the processes of restriction and reworking things to change cuts and to the sort of the detail and the minutiae of the process. He was of very little interest to him, and so I found myself, and together with another very fine composer called James Brett, who was Michael's other assistant. We started on the same day. We're still very good friends now, and worked together for 5 years side by side. And so James and I had slightly different personalities. I was the more organized spreadsheet guy. James is another fabulous natural musician, and sort of between the two of us, we supported Michael in pretty much every aspect of trying to create a platform for him to be Michael. And so if that meant making sure that all the machines worked all the time, or if he wanted to do something weird and crazy, then we would kind of like fix for that to happen. We would work with the orchestrators and the copyists so that Michael could change his mind about a cue on an hour before we're going to record it. And then we would run around and try and sort of make that physically possible for him, for all the musicians. And for the vast majority of the time, it was trying to sort of clear a path so that he could be as spontaneous as he could, but also we had a responsibility to the production to make sure that the right music got in the right place on the film as well.
As he became more experienced, he also started to work as a music editor on, films such as Lord of the Rings, Love Actually, Bridget Jones, Children of Men, also Insomnia. Would you say this also helped you to understand the language of cinema in order to become an even more accomplished composer?
I look back at sometimes if I have occasion to look at IMDb and scroll and scroll back down, I still can't quite believe some of the projects that I accidentally found myself on. And with each one of those, I think there is certainly a wide range of practical experience of just being part of the team that gets the music for these films across the line. You know, each one is different in its own way, and if you do enough of it, I think you sort of, all the experiences tend to provide a sort of a template, so you can assess a future project. You can kind of go, oh, okay, it looks like it's going to have a bit of that Lord of the Rings-ness about it, or it's going to be a bit more Children of Men, so working with a great auteur director for a year. But I think the key, more so than the practical technical side, I think what I've had the great privilege of over the years is working with some of the absolute finest filmmakers that we have in our generation, and it's always the people and their artistic vision and their nature that I find fascinating, and why I continue to be fascinated by film and TV, because each one of those people that you meet and work with is unique and different. So someone like Alfonso Cuarón, for instance, the amazing director of Children of Men, who went on to win the Oscar for Gravity.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's going to say that Alfonso Cuarón is the same as Richard Curtis, for instance, on Love Actually. So they couldn't be two more different filmmakers or different people, but they're both extraordinary in their way, and both incredibly committed to the films that they're making. Both very, very smart, and with a sort of a depth and a passion for what they're doing that is absolutely infectious and inspiring. So having had the chance to be in the room over the years with some of these great filmmakers, I still count as a great privilege.
Michael, now I would like to talk a little bit about your collaboration with your friend David Arnold.
The great David.
Yeah, the great David Arnold, fantastic musician and composer. And you did 4 seasons of Sherlock together. You also collaborated on the TV series Dracula. And previously you had also helped him on Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, and the Chronicles of Narnia, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And how did your collaboration come about, and what makes it so engaging and also fruitful at the same time?
Yeah, good question. I think that for me, how we got to know each other and why our relationship has proved to be so funny and hopefully fruitful over the years speaks to an issue that is very common in studios and with the music teams, which is one of trust. And it's one of the things that I realized on day one with Michael Kamen all the way back on Event Horizon, was that the atmosphere within a music team that's working under incredible pressure and but still trying to stay sort of open and creative, everybody in that team has to have such a complete trust of each other. As an assistant to Michael Kamen, myself and James would be the first people that would hear an improvisation that he did. You know, he would improvise in front of us because we would fly the computers. And so that degree of kind of intimacy is something that I think is difficult in a lot of the communications that young composers have now. A lot of the ways that they learn about film scoring or learn about the process might be by watching YouTube videos or by the sort of some of the amazing online information that there is now. But one of the many aspects that watching sort of a tutorial video misses out is the sense of being in the room with someone when music is being created under pressure is an incredibly private occupation. And so basically after I'd spent the 5 years with Michael, and we'd done Band of Brothers was the great TV series was the last project I did with Michael, and then I decided to leave so that I could spend more time working on my own compositions, because all the time I was in theory supposed to be writing, and there wasn't much time left, as you could imagine, after
Yes.
thing we were doing with Michael. And so we very amicably sort of parted of the ways. And I got a call from David, who I didn't know at that time, but we knew a lot of the same people. And he he's got a writing room at Air Studios, and he asked me to pop up and see him for a beer and a chat, which I did. And I could tell that he was, I think, gently sounding out perhaps how I would talk about working with Michael. And so he asked me a few questions just about what it was like working with Mr. Kamen, who did have a reputation that preceded him. And and I think my recollection of that conversation was that I was professionally discreet about anything that may have happened behind the scenes. And so sort of about halfway through that conversation, it wasn't deliberate. I wasn't sort of particularly putting on a persona for that. David asked me if I'd help him out with a project. And it was only later that I realized that I think there'd been a sort of conscious or unconscious sort of test there, which wasn't about whether I was fast enough with the computers or could write a good cue. It was about, do I respect the circle of privacy and the circle of trust? And now sort of, another however many years on, that is 15 years or so, I'm really aware of that with the people that I work with as well myself. And when we have young people that come and join our team for a certain period of time, or really anybody that I work with, trust and privacy is really important. And so I helped David out with a project that he had, the schedules of two projects had collided in an impossible way, and so he needed an extra pair of hands, and that went okay. And David, that's not sort of something that David had done before or since, really, apart from our relationship working together. And then the sort of, we continued that working relationship, and some of those projects are sort of more public, so you'll see sort of Hot Fuzz on there, and a couple of Bond films that David was working on, and I'm always incredibly sort of boringly at length go to pains to make sure that it's very, very clear that these are all David's films. The act of writing additional music or doing some arrangements or doing a few fixes is in no way takes away from the fact that there is always a lead composer who has got the blank paper and all the relationships to deal with, as I well know myself now. And the difference between being that person that has to come up with the concept and being someone who has to fix 20 bars because the picture's changed in reel 3 but carry on in the same style and don't break it. Yes. Those are two very different jobs.
Absolutely.
But David, as anybody who's heard him interviewed or has met him will know, is one of the funniest and driest men in the film music industry. So I think from that moment till a few days ago when I spoke to him last, I don't think we've had a conversation that hasn't descended into silliness and sort of slightly peculiar jokes after about 5 minutes, and long may that continue.
Yeah, I mean, he strikes me as a very funny, laid back, and polite person. On top of being, of course, a brilliant, musician and composer. So he comes across as a fabulous person.
He's a very, very interesting man, because he is all of those things that you describe. He's gentle and kind and very generous and very smart, and wears all of that very lightly. And so I think often people who who in public are seen like that, sometimes you miss the fact that also they're quite steely and determined as well, because nobody achieves what he achieved without being determined. And I have to say, I've the same thought about Richard Curtis, who also I'm a massive admirer of, and he is funny and witty and gentle and sparkling and all of those great things, but also very smart and very determined. And I think it's an admirable combination. It's really that drive, wherever that comes from. Sometimes it comes from loss. Sometimes it comes from something in people's families that they felt perhaps that either they missed a parent, or that there was something in their background has leading to a drive and a determination.
Yes.
But watching that work out with people who are also very talented and very clever, I think is fascinating.
I wholeheartedly agree. And of course, you have to be not only talented, but you have to have a determination and a strong point of view in order to, become successful, I think. And also in order to have a great collaboration with someone. You don't have to necessarily agree on every bar and on every cue. That's what makes it interesting. And I think you and David have formed a great team. I mean, you worked on Sherlock and you brought the character to life again. You breathed new life into the character of Sherlock Holmes, who is a well-known character. Everybody knows him and the story. And also I felt that your work on Dracula was very good, and you seem to have a good collaboration.
Those are both really interesting shows, because it's probably the two most famous literary characters, or certainly two of the most famous literary characters that there are. And there have been literally hundreds of adaptations of both of those characters on film and TV. However, I don't think either Sherlock Holmes or Dracula has got a theme in the same way that perhaps Superman, probably John Williams' theme for Superman, if you ask most people walking down the street, what's the Superman tune, I think they would all sing the same thing. But I mean, maybe if you ask them about the Sherlock Holmes, maybe they'd sing our tune. If they did, that would be amazing. But I think there isn't a sort of settled musical language really for either of those characters. There've been some great interpretations in the past, but David and I felt both 10, 11, 12 years ago when we started Sherlock, and also just last year when we're doing Dracula.
Yes.
We did feel a sort of an open manuscript page in front of us that we could just respond as instinctively and intuitively to the pictures on screen in front of us, and almost always that feels like the most successful way to find a scoring approach that is integrated with the show or the film that's in front of you. We always do the same thing. Dave and I we're both slightly perhaps creatures of habit, and we'll get the scripts for whatever it is, and we'll both read them individually, and we'll have a text chat or a phone chat and kind of, what do you think of it? I'm usually more enthusiastic. I point out all the good bits. David points out all the bits that don't work. And then we kind of think about it for a while, and maybe think about some things that could work, some sort of high concept ideas. But then we'll probably not do much about it until we go to the first read through with the cast, in which case you start to see who the actors are, but also you get a sense of how the production's going to come to life. And usually at the read through, when we're kind of walking back to the taxi rank, or to go and have a drink afterwards, we'll discount half the things that we originally thought, because you kind of go, oh, the thing with the choir, no, that's not right for this show now. And we were thinking maybe it could be electronica along the same. No, that's not. So half that thinking disappears straight away. And then usually when we see the first rough assemblies, when the rough cut starts to come through, we often jettison the other half of the ideas as well, because you're only ever dealing with the film that the director has made, not what everybody would have wanted to make. And so that first spotting session where you sit down with the director and you all in the case of if it's David and I with the director and the editor maybe, or one of the producers, for them that is that same incredibly intimate private moment when all the thousands of possibilities of what this could look like have been reduced to the thing on the small screen in front of you, which is that this is the show. And that's a very intimate and tender moment. I always feel very empathetic towards the director. I mean, you take a kind of just a silly example of if in the script it kind of said, oh, and 60,000 elephants race over the top of the hill, scattering people and sort of the village in front of them. And obviously by the time actually that gets shot, the budget's gone. They only could get 4 elephants. They didn't have the weather on that day. Sort of actually the village was sort of 2 blokes in a little cart with some fruit on it. And that the director perhaps wanted that scene to be different, to be, and sometimes they will look to you as the composer and say, oh, I wanted this to feel more epic. Is there anything that you could do? Or I wanted this to be more exciting, or we didn't quite get the performance on the day. And then you have to have a sort of a trusting, intimate conversation where as sort of gently and collaboratively as possible, you can say, for sure, we can get 100 people singing on this thing, sort of we can bring out the big guns music wise. But actually watching it, if I didn't know that the script said it was supposed to be 30,000 elephants, I kind of like that it's just 4 elephants in the fruit cart. Maybe we can work with what is on screen. And so I think that often the process of trying to devise a new musical language for these archetypal characters, for these very familiar characters, is sort of, I think the easier bit to talk about are the high concept things that you think, oh, well, maybe it's a modern day adaptation, so we should try and introduce some modern elements. He plays the violin, doesn't he? So, well, let's have some violin. All of those things are easy to talk about, but don't really get to the heart of it, which I think is a sort of instinctive reaction to what you actually see in front of you.
Yes.
And a sort of honest reaction. And that often leads you to really interesting places. Who knew that Benedict Cumberbatch would be such an electric presence on screen as Sherlock? I mean, we didn't. I hadn't, I knew he was great. And actually David had worked on a couple of films with him before, but he brought such energy to that part that anything that we'd got that was sort of, I don't know, I kind of something a bit more reserved or a bit more sort of slow motion, none of that would have worked. When you see him on screen, particularly doing a deduction, it's the most extraordinary, energetic, wonderful thing. And so as soon as we saw it, we knew what we needed to do was to try and take the audience inside the excitement of being in his mind.
Yes.
And you can't get that from the script. You only get it when you see the light and the fire in someone's eyes when they're given a really amazing performance.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, first of all, his performance was extraordinary, and of course you're right. You can find, I think many composers can find inspiration from the screenplay, but many describe it as helpful and as a guideline to find a theme or a structure of some sort. But as you just mentioned, many people would also basically say that what you see on the screen is the icing on the cake, and then only then are you able to fully flesh out your ideas. Watch the performance, watch the story unfold, and then you can, decide on whether or not you want an epic sound, an intimate sound. Do you want a theme, a big theme, small theme? So many different, aspects you need to cover. And of course, you managed that brilliantly. And also, when you worked on Unforgotten for the past, 5 years, and you always need to make up your mind. And how do we kind of, push boundaries, or how do we take a step back? So that's really difficult.
I think there's always a risk that it's slightly a high wire act, of which the score is one strangely important part of, in terms of what makes a film or a TV show into a successful whole. And I often think that if we take risks together, then in terms of the filmmaking team, if you're side by side with the directors and the producers and the writers and the showrunners, and if you're all taking a creative risk together, it works in combination, then you've got a fighting chance of making something interesting that people would want to watch. I think perhaps a less fruitful approach is for the composer to kind of arbitrarily decide that they are going to take a creative risk on their own that's not really that's not been earned by the rest of the production, or perhaps it isn't even really wanted by the rest of the production. And so I think it's very tempting, because the film and TV scoring, I think, it is a balance of art and craft. I think it's quite rare for composers to be able to just right from the start select only those projects which are going to be extraordinary right from the beginning. It doesn't really work like that. You tend to have to build up relationships with people, and to build up relationships with people, you have to work alongside them. And they might be doing a project that isn't really something that would be your favorite. But if you want to build a long-term working relationship with someone, you smile and you find something wonderful for them. And consequently, there's a sort of natural selection that happens if you're lucky enough to have worked on things that have been successful, where it looks like you picked just those and only those, whereas the reality is that we all work on lots of things that aren't successful as well at the same time. But I think if you sort of try and take these joint creative risks together, sometimes they won't work, but it's always exciting and it's always interesting. I'm trying to choose the projects that I work on and the people that I work with, not through some sort of arbitrary sense of whether I think something will be necessarily commercially successful, or whether, what the money's like, or whether it looks like it's cool. I'm trying to live in a way that is aligned with the values that I've got artistically and personally.
It can be a hit and miss scenario. Just because a film is commercially successful, it doesn't mean it was artistically fulfilling or necessarily good. And, of course, a film could bomb at the box office, but it could still be a very good film.
Absolutely. It's very easy earlier on in your career, and I'm sure that I would have said this, that when younger composers are looking for a break, and they're looking, particularly in these days of social media, where it's very easy to actively compare yourself with the outside of a range of other people who are your peers. Obviously we all self-censor with the things that we put on social media, so we're in a constant environment of comparison.
Yes.
And I think that for me, my part of my growing older has been about trying to see a kind of slightly longer term through line where if I feel that I've made choices about how I'm going to spend my time, and particularly with a young family now, if I've made those choices based on my values, and I've kind of kept that, I've sort of dealt with people how I like to have been dealt with, and I feel comfortable about my choices,
Yes.
then the success or failure commercially of anything that we do is absolutely outside our control. Absolutely, yes. I've done two beautiful films with a young director called Craig Roberts, who was an actor, well, still is a very good actor, and he was the lead actor when he was in his teens of a film called Submarine, which is a brilliant film, and he's the guy on the poster for Submarine, and he is this incredible young talent and writer, director, actor, and I recently scored a film for him that's just doing the festival circuit with Sally Hawkins in, called Eternal Beauty, which hasn't come out on wide release yet. And I love working with Craig. I think he's a fabulous, just a great person, really smart and interesting and funny, all the good things. And I think he's already making great films and will go on to make better ones. But then, they're not troubling the top 5 of international box office receipts.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, they should. This film, Eternal Beauty with Sally Hawkins, is brilliant. But I feel elevated and inspired working with Craig. And then if Sally Hawkins' film wins a big prize and goes on to have a wide release, then that's great. But if it doesn't, also, that doesn't in any way diminish the experience that I had and the love I've got of working with Craig.
Michael, if we still have a couple of minutes left, I would like to talk a bit about Erase Tape Records, which is
Yeah.
a record label focusing on avant-garde and electronic music. They have released 2 of your albums, Entanglement and also Tender Symmetry. And please tell our audience a bit about those albums and how you conceived the idea.
I love I love talking about the records that I make, and actually how working with Erased Tapes, who are a label based now in London but with firm feet in Berlin. And I think there is the balance that we were talking about earlier of craft and art in film scoring. I think for many composers, their own personal voice rightly is put at the service of the film or the TV show. And actually, before I'd met Michael Kamen, going right back to the beginning, after I left college, I was writing sort of new classical music for performance and for contemporary dance and ballet, and so it really felt like when I met Robert Raths, who's the founder and the artistic force behind Erased Tapes, I'd done some string quartets, recorded 4 string quartets just for fun on the afternoon because I'd booked a studio for a day, and we had a string quartet in to do some pop charts in the morning. And the week before, I thought, I've paid for the whole day. Why don't I just write some string quartets and get them to do another session in the afternoon, which I did. And there was just something about that experience where there was no picture and no click track and nobody else looking over my shoulder that reminded me so much of the music that I used to write and why I used to write it. And a mutual friend sent those quartets to Robert, and we had a long conversation about where I was at and what I was interested in doing. And in the end, they released those actually as an EP called A Stillness. And so that was the thing that came before the albums.
Yes.
And then after that, it became clear that I did have some things I wanted to say that were personal and meaningful to me, and that the in the sense of when you're working on a film score or a TV score, you're accompanying, you're trying to illuminate a story that someone else has written as best you can. I felt it was time for me to start writing some more of my own stories and illuminating those. And so the first album, Entanglement, I got a flat in Berlin, and I spent as much time as I could over there. So I wrote all of that album in this tiny flat well, actually, you can get quite good flats in Berlin for less than you can in London. So it's a nice flat. But I wrote out there and then recorded out there in this wonderful studio called Voxton with musicians from Berlin. And in a way, it was a deliberate effort to take myself out of the studio, out of Abbey Road, out of my normal surroundings, and to try and start this process of discovery, and fixate on some of the issues that are important to me. And a lot of that album is connected with physics, with particle physics. My dad, love him, is still with us, was a physics teacher, and my mum a biology teacher, and I have this really strong scientific background. And so the entanglement of the title is quantum entanglement, and there are various sort of metaphors of how you can view life through a scientific lens, but the poetry and the love of life kind of comes through, or you can view things through a sort of poetic or much more emotional way, but still the science is still there and underneath it, because the maths and the science creates the beauty. So Entanglement was an effort to try and sort of explore those ideas out in Berlin. But then when I came to do Tender Symmetry a couple of years ago, I realized that I was slightly hiding when I went out to Berlin. I was slightly wearing someone else's clothes because I wasn't quite ready at that time to explore things that were more personal and closer to home. And so for Tender Symmetry, thanks to the help of some very hardworking people around me, we went to 7 different locations in the UK that were beautiful historic settings. So sometimes in the open air. We recorded in some tunnels that were cut into the cliffs of Dover that soldiers had used to hide out when during the war, and in each of those places that were much closer to home, I went and visited each one of them and went home and wrote a piece, and then we went back and recorded. So each of the pieces on Tender Symmetry is recorded in a very different acoustic, in a very different field recording sort of way. And I think that was a next stage in starting to tell some more personal stories. And I'm actually just starting the process for my next projects in this sort of vein, which in a way I think is a sort of a logical next step for me, in that I was with Tender Symmetry, I was responding to the buildings and to the stories that were there. And I've always been fascinated by architecture. And I think for my next project, I'm starting to look at what would it be like if I built imaginary buildings in my studio and on paper. What would happen if I constructed musical buildings that could be filled with the imagination of the listener, or filled with another piece of art, in a way, sort of filled with poetry or filled with song. And that I'm fascinated by the way that the systematic nature of music creates such extraordinary beauty, that the kind of architecture, the form of a piece, somehow creates a space in time for us to have an emotional experience. It's the ultimate intersection of science and art, I think. Thank you for asking.
Sounds like a very good idea. Looking forward to what you will cook up here. And does working on an album of this kind, Tender Symmetry or Entanglement, actually allow you to lose the restrictions which are sometimes or oftentimes imposed by filmmakers? Can you kind of separate the business point of view from the artistic point of view?
It does, and again, it's a very smart question because I I think practically working on an album, I can, I can set my own deadlines together with the label. I can sort of generate the process myself, and so you would think it would be utterly free, but actually, human beings as they are, is that I've been deliberately having to give myself permission to be free and to sort of, and sometimes that involves breaking practical habits, because as soon as I sit in the chair that I'm sitting in now, which is in my studio, I'm surrounded with all the equipment that I use to write film and TV scores, and where I've spent many, many, many hours over the years. And there's something I often find that I need to change my routines and change my habits and be aware that I don't fall into the habits from the film and TV world that are just so ingrained. But actually, what I find is fascinating is that when I do that, then that freedom, that sort of emotional freedom and musical freedom, then filters back into the film and TV work that I do. So a show like Unforgotten, which was supposed to be doing the fourth season of right now, but that's been postponed like many things. I wrote a cue which for season three, which I didn't use for season three because it was too much. It was too musical. That the sort of the emotional content was sort of too strong. It's too strong a flavor. And I took that, and that actually became, I reworked it, and that became one of the last track on Tender Symmetry. And I put a vocal on it, and it turned into a whole another work. But I find that the freedom that I am now giving myself permission to have now flows between the film and TV scores and the albums in a way that feels much more integrated now. And I'm excited to see what I can get to do for the next 10, 15, 20 years, and however long it is before I want to go and sit outside with a cold beer and put my feet up. But I think it's exciting times.
I think it's great to, let's say, switch gears from time to time, going from working on a TV series and a movie to, a concept album or a solo album. So that's very interesting. And I think your work has a lot to offer. Also, the albums, two albums which we just talked about, it's expressive and meaningful music, and also the short album release, Songs for Evelyn. And I'm looking forward to your new albums and to experience what else you can do. And I'm sure the audience is excited about this as well.
Thank you, Michael. That's very kind of you to say so.
Michael, thank you so very much for taking so much time out of your schedule. I really appreciate that, and I had a great time talking to you. I hope you enjoyed the chat as well.
I did. Thanks very much.